Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net. Welcome to this special edition of Windows on the World, which features Mahay from Wolverhampton, whose mother Kishni was killed on a pedestrian crossing by a speeding police car 30 years ago in Wolverhampton. This is from the website kishnimahay.com, and Raj is looking for 100,000 signatures. So please sign the petition, which is on windowsontheworld.net and, of course, kishnimahay.com. I sincerely thank you for visiting this website, says Raj. It is my goal to convince you to help this e-petition campaign to flourish so that Parliament in Westminster will act. I have spent 3 decades pursuing this justice for my late mother, so she may get dignity in death, finally rest in peace, and that closure is in sight. Each day for the last 29 years, I have questioned myself if there is such a thing as real justice at all. Across these years, I have tried to make the case for the miscarriage of justice that incorrectly reigns unchallenged. Kishnimahay was killed as a result of being knocked down by a speeding police patrol car that was not driven to the favourable conditions of the road ahead. My mother was on a pedestrian crossing at the time of the unlawful fatality. The subsequent police investigation, coupled with the post-mortem examination report and the eventual inquest hearing, proved to be a telegraphed assortment of distorted facts. The climax being a grotesque character assassination that my mother was an acute alcoholic to the extent her liver was ridden with cirrhosis. The investigation was simply full of fabricated inaccuracies where the moral compass was mislaid. Police culpability and incriminating evidence was suppressed. I had presented the alternative facts to the West Midlands Police in December 2008 as part of my 3-hour comprehensive presentation, which proved to be vastly and worryingly futile. I have no doubt that the evidence amassed substantiates that a police cover-up was executed and key entities that commandeered the investigation were complicit in their pursuit of a desired outcome and inquest hearing verdict. Our only mandate is to fill a massive void where justice should unconditionally reside for all to see. There can only be one law, one truth, leading to one justice. So that's from the website kishnimahay.com. Please visit the website and sign the petition. Here is my interview with Raj.
First of all, Mark, I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to basically share this experience, and hopefully the audience will spare a little space in their heart and hopefully take on board what I've said today. And with that said, they will then be engaging in the e-petition. The aim of the e-petition is to get 100,000 signatures with a view of getting a debate in the House of Commons, which will hopefully lead to a independent inquiry. In terms of the actual backdrop to this case, my mother was killed by a police officer. She, at the time, was on a pedestrian crossing, according to witness statements. And basically, the police officer was driving a car. He was on his way to a hit and run, and unfortunately, he was speeding in a built-up area, which meant he was unable to take evasive action to avoid hitting my mother and basically throwing her 40 yards to her death. He was speeding, according to eyewitness accounts, he was in excess of 70 to 80 miles an hour, as I say, in a built-up area. And the road itself is quite hard to negotiate, even for if you're doing 30 miles or 40 miles an hour. Basically, the road itself is very narrow as you approach the pedestrian crossing, and also the road has an acute bend prior to the pedestrian crossing. So all these factors would be, certainly from a driving perspective, would have to be taken into consideration. I understand he's on his way to a hit and run, which eventually turned out to be nothing like what it was originally set out to be. It was actually just a bumper-to-bumper job, and basically he did not need to speed, but I understand he was not told that at the time when it happened, so he was on his way. I basically had a phone call from one of the shopkeepers, and they basically said to me that your mother's involved in an accident on the Cannock Road. So this happened in March 1989. the 14th of March to be precise, and the approximate time was about 7:45 in the evening. As I say, I got a phone call from one of the shopkeepers. The gist of his message was that my mother was in an accident and I needed to be, making my way to where the accident had occurred. So I basically ran as fast as I could, and I was the first member of the family to reach there. And as I went round the corner and I actually hit the cannon crowd itself, I could see my mother's body covered by a blanket, and all that was exposed was her 2 feet. And she was laid in a pool of blood on the pavement, and I can only assume that the body came to rest there after the impact had occurred. Now, as I approach, I try to approach the body, I kind of lost all my bearings, if you will, because I was just distraught. The stress was immense, and I collapsed to my knees. As I collapsed to my knees, an officer came towards me and grabbed my throat and tried to pull me up. And I tried to tell him that, as much as I could speak, because he had his hand around my throat, I said, "Look, that's my mother. What are you doing this for?" And the next thing I know, there's a policeman behind me as well, and he grabbed my shoulders and pulled me up from my jacket or my jumper, pulled me up, and I then was on my feet again. And I tried to approach the body again, I tried to walk towards the body, and there was an officer right next to the body. It turned out later he was the actual passenger. So he had the police driver and a passenger with him, a police officer next to him in the car. So he was the passenger in the front seat. And basically, as I approached the body, he made derogatory remarks. He says, "There's nothing you can do. It's not a pretty sight." And so this is the compassion, this is the sympathy, this is the empathy that I was afforded. So I retreat because I'm thinking, I'm going to be manhandled again. As I'm retreating, I could see in the corner of my eye that the crash debris on the pedestrian crossing was being actually pushed away from the pedestrian crossing. Now, at this point in time, no road traffic incident forensics had arrived because the road was gridlocked on either side because of the death. And so invariably what was happening was they were systematically defacing the crime scene. They did not ring fence it. They did not make any attempt to keep that area sterile for, as I say, the forensics guys to come onto the crime scene and actually do their evaluation and their account of what had happened. So as I'm watching this in the corner of my eye, one of the shoes is kicked towards me, and I don't know what happened to me. I just felt the urge to pick it up, and subsequently I did pick it up, and I've had it to this day. And I could see around me, it was just mayhem. There was onlookers. There was like I say, traffic was halted on either side. The police were doing their hardest to basically move debris away from the pedestrian crossing. As this is happening, other members of my family are now arriving to the crime scene. As they arrive, they are quickly corralled into cars, waiting cars, and they're driven back up the Powell Street where we lived, because that area was clear. And basically what happened was they were just taken away from the scene. Now my father, obviously he couldn't get to the crime scene as fast as everybody else, so he arrived slightly later. And as he arrived, an officer put his arm around his neck and tried to pull him back. And again I said to the officer, "Look what you're doing, this is his wife. That's my dad and this is his wife." And until I said that a couple of times, there was not actually registering what was going on. And as they were becoming more and more irate, they started calling me a packy bastard, you black bastard, what you effing out playing at, and all this. They was coming out with all these kind of words, absolute racism, absolute derogatory terms, unwarranted, no provocation. I'm trying to explain that he's my father, that's his wife, what you doing this for? And we get abuse. So next thing I know, my father's taken away, and he's taken back home. So I'm the last one to stay on the scene. And I could see the way there was moving stuff around, where they was trying to well, in essence, they were trying to, conceal all the evidence. If I'll be truthful.
Now, Raj, I just want to bring in a few points here.
Yeah,
very
sure.
important. That your mother was the 6th person to be killed in a police chase or by a police car in a fortnight in the country at the time.
That is correct. Yeah, that is correct.
The witness who came forward and was actually presented on the television at the time did state that your mother was actually on the crossing when she was hit by the police car. And of course it was stated, I believe, that there was a red light as well.
I can clarify that further for you,
yes.
Mark. The lady in question was Mrs. Violet Mahay. She basically came on one of the TV items, on one of the bulletins on the following evening, and basically she was asked, without any ambiguity, without any confusion, she quite categorically said that my mother was on the pedestrian crossing, and when the reporter asked her again, she said yes, she was on the crossings when she was hit. Now, in plain English, you can't get any clearer than that. And I actually met this lady a couple of days after, and I approached her and I asked her, I said, look, I saw you on the news, and thank you for volunteering that information. And she basically said that she was horrified by the way the police had treated me, because obviously she saw this, as I mentioned earlier, the way I was treated. And basically she said that, she was quite happy to offer a statement in relation to what she said on the TV news. So she was quite adamant that she had witnessed my mother actually on the pedestrian crossing at the point of impact. Now that's the clearest she can get. Another lady who actually was on one of the TV news as well, Abimla Devi Banga, she was actually the shopkeeper. My mother was actually on her way to the shops, and it was Mrs. Banga's shop that she was going to visit. And the actual shop is right adjacent to the pedestrian crossing. So my mother would not need to, take alternative routes to access the shop. And if you come from the pedestrian crossing and keep walking straight ahead of you, you actually walk into the shop. It's that kind of close to the pedestrian crossing. So basically, she said in one of the papers, in a couple of the papers actually, that the car that she witnessed, the police car that is, was driving between 80 miles an hour. So 80 miles an hour. So let's translate that into real terms. It was very fast. Let's just say it was very fast. The other thing was that she said that debris was scattered all over her shop window. And that can only be the case if my mother was on the crossings at the point of impact. There's no other reason for debris to shower their shop window. So that was another thing that was concealed. And the two ladies in question, so that's Mrs. Violet Mahay and Mrs. Bimla Devi Banga, were not summoned to appear at the inquest hearing. And these were two people or witnesses that were pinnacle to the case that we are trying to make, that my mother was on the crossings at the point of impact. Now, the police have come out on numerous occasions, even up until 2015, when I was interviewed by the BBC. They kind of repeated what they said before, which was that my mother was in the near vicinity of a pedestrian crossing. So that's what they've always maintained. But the two witnesses, as I've stated, were not actually involved or asked to volunteer their information. Either they were suppressed or they were interviewed at some stage and their information was suppressed, or they cherry-picked favourable witness statements that they deemed fitted their kind of story. And I can only say, if I just continue chronologically, the actual death was on the 14th of March, as I said earlier. The following day, on the 15th of March, I personally went to identify my mother's body. I was taken to a nearby police station, and there's a small mortuary on the side of the police station. I first went into the mortuary with one of the sergeants, and I obviously identified my mother, and then I was then taken to the police station itself, which was across a car park. As I left the mortuary and got onto the car park to get into the police station, I saw one of the officers from the night before. Now, he was sitting in his car and he was looking at me, smiling and revving the car while he was looking at me, and I could not understand why he was doing that. It seemed that, you know, as far as the police or the West Midlands police were concerned, my mother was expendable. She was nothing to them. And as far as they was concerned, it's just another day at the office for them. And this is what I'm on about, the compassion, the sympathy and empathy. It was non-existent. In fact, it was non-existent, you know, and I'm not going to make excuses for them. That's how it was. Then as I got into the actual police station, I was taken to an interrogation room. Bear in mind, I'm on my own. Nobody else from the family is with me. I have no friends or anybody else with me. I'm on my own. I get put into an interrogation room for 10 minutes when nobody turns up. There's suddenly two officers entered the room. One was representing the Police Complaints Authority, which was then later become the Independent Police Crime Commission. Basically, they came in, and the first thing they said to me was that my mother was at fault. The investigation is a mere formality, and basically I should back off. And if I don't back off, there will be consequences. And as he's saying this to me, he's pointing his finger towards me in a very aggressive manner. So I can only assume what he was saying, he kind of meant it. And that was the nature of his body language, you know, and how he was animated. And that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to scare me. And he also said that, do you want to see your 2.5-year-old daughter grow up? Which I found very harrowing and very, very frightening, to be honest with you. But I maintained my kind of pose as much as I could, and I just put my head down and I started shaking my head. I'm thinking, this is it now. All the indications are now, this is a cover-up. This is a police cover-up. And as I got my head down, I'd have had enough by that time. Another officer then walks back into the room. He's the one who actually took me to the mortuary and got me to ID my mother's body. And he walked into the room and he said, would you like to go home now? And I said, yes, please. So I went home. He took me home in his car. And as I'm getting nearer to the house, he said to me, under no circumstances speak to any sections of the media. That's the written press and obviously TV or radio. And I said, okay, if that's what you want me to do. Obviously, I just said that for the sake of saying it, because all I was concerned about was leaving that car and going back home. So as I got near the home, I got out the car, and in front of me was the BBC and the ITV Central News for the West Midlands region. And they approached me and they said, would you like to give a statement? And one of the statements that I gave was that I did not know why the car was coming at that speed. I don't know what the circumstances were, but as a result of this, you know, my mother's been killed and she's never coming back. And I also appealed for witnesses because, as I say, the penny had dropped. And when I say the penny had dropped big time. I knew this was a police cover-up because, I say, the way the officers were acting around me and what they were saying to me. And basically, I gave, interviews to both BBC and ITV, but only one got transmitted, unfortunately. But nonetheless, I got my point across. And that was the nature of what they did. And obviously, the solicitors got involved, the family solicitor got involved. He asked the police or the PCA for any documents and witness statements in readiness for the inquest hearing. They subsequently refused to give anything to us. First they agreed. They said, again, we'll share everything we can because we're open and we're transparent. We've got nothing to hide. That was the impression they were given originally. Then after a few months, they decided they was not going to give us anything at all. So if you can imagine, the death was in March 89. The actual inquest hearing was in November, the tail end of November. So from that time, from March to November, we had no idea who the witnesses were, what the forensics had come up with, what was their conclusions, what was their measurements and what have you. We had nothing. So in essence, what we did, we walked into that inquest hearing, basically not knowing anything of the police investigation, and we were blind to all the facts. It was only when the actual inquest started that things started, registering. And unfortunately, one of the biggest problems and one of the biggest flaws in the police's investigation was the actual post-mortem examination, which was conducted by a Home Office pathologist. And basically, he was the first witness to take the witness box. And the opening two sentences he made were that my mother was an alcoholic. She had incurred cirrhosis of the liver attributable to alcohol abuse over the years. Now that is a blatant lie, because my mother never drank alcohol. She showed no symptoms of cirrhosis, certainly from an alcoholic point of view, that they were trying to say. And also, this was a massive slur on my mother, not to mention a character assassination. And the net result of that is that the 10 jurors who were at my mother's inquest hearing, they did a character assassination in such a way that they sent subliminal messaging to these jurors to give the impression that my mother's ability to cross the road would be greatly impaired because of the so-called vice that they claimed she was an alcoholic, basically. Unfortunately, the other side to this is that, and this is not to reflect on anybody's ethnicity or anybody's diversity background or anything like that, but the 10 jurors were all white Caucasian. Now, my mother arrived in this country in the early 60s. My father came in the mid-50s. I myself was born in 1964 in Wolverhampton, where I basically was born and bred. And those people, those women, my mother was one of the first women to come over from the subcontinent into England to make her future with her husband. And women of that culture, and women of that era, would never ever entertain the idea of actually drinking alcohol, because that was their culture. Now, for them to say my mother was an alcoholic to the extent that she incurred cirrhosis of her liver, that's a blatant and strategic lie in order to win over the jurors, to give the impression that she will not be able to cross the road because of her, likeness for alcohol. And I also say it is also a slur on her contemporaries and her peers who came over in the same era, those women who came over with her. So I don't understand why they did this. Not only have they killed my mother and denied the fact that she wasn't on the pedestrian crossing due to the reckless driving and not driving to the favourable conditions of the road, but they've also done a character assassination. So in my eyes, and in our family's eyes, they basically killed her twice, one in a physical sense and one from a character point of view. And then on the news itself, one of the police officers, who was actually acting as the press officer or the public liaison officer, referred to my mother as the old proverbial dog who actually darted in front of the police car. And to use derogatory terms against the deceased, I mean, that shows how far or how much they thought of my mother. As I said earlier, as far as they were concerned, she was an expendable. She was nothing to them. And they did everything. They, in essence, I would say, commandeered this investigation to the extent that when it went to the CPS, as far as the CPS were concerned, there was no case to answer. The police officer in question wasn't even disciplined internally by the West Midlands Police. So it all points to a police cover-up. And I can only suggest then that this is, the way or the culture of West Midlands Police. Now, one of the officers who was on my mother's case, I was invited to go to the police station. I was called up one evening and I attended the police station. And he basically said, I'm off the case now. And I asked him why. And he basically said that he's been asked to go and do the Hillsborough investigation. My mother died in March, and Hillsborough happened in April. So the West Midlands Police were actually then expected to investigate the South Yorkshire Police regarding the Hillsborough investigation. And I can assure you, I was not surprised in terms of the outcome of that investigation, because those families have suffered, and it's all because they did another cover-up in Hillsborough. And I can tell you that because that officer, the way he was acting towards me, and the way things he was conducting himself, and the way he was saying things to me, it can only point to closing ranks, nepotism, and looking after, each other in the police. But in my eyes, a crime is a crime. A police uniform is not a disclaimer. A police uniform is not a defence. And you've done a crime, like a civilian, you're expected to be accountable for it. And, the criminal justice system in this country will give you a fair trial, as much as they can, but nonetheless, you have to be tried in a court of law for your crime. Now, what they've done is sidestepped all that just to protect the integrity, and I use the word very loosely, the integrity of the police officer concerned, the police officers that arrived at the crime scene, and also the actual West Midlands Police Force in its entirety. Because they did not want a public outcry. And as you rightly say, Mark, my mother was the sixth person to be killed by a police vehicle in a 2-week or a fortnight period. And my mother was the only pedestrian in that sequence. All the other deaths were either in cars, or they were parked cars, or, there wasn't pedestrians. So they wanted to avert a public outcry. And that was their intention. And they did this through commandeering the investigation, as I say, and by using these, I'm loath to use the word tactics, because they ain't tactics. These are basically taking a case and making it fit an outcome, regardless of the evidence, regardless of the witnesses, regardless of anything else, to fit their own particular outcome. And that's what they did.
Yes. Now, this is a very big point, that the independent witness came forward and they still carried on with their story, and it wasn't challenged in court. And you were telling me before the interview that you couldn't get hold of these people. You couldn't get hold. There were 2 witnesses and you couldn't get hold of them. There was somebody who said that the police car may have had flashing lights, but the siren wasn't on. So yes, that would indicate that they were entirely negligent, as what the evidence was that there was a red light at the time as well. Are those facts all correct?
My understanding is, Mark, that the witnesses that were either in the press or on TV kind of concur with what you've said. What I will add on top of that is that they have always maintained that the flashing blue lights were in operation, the sirens were blaring on that police vehicle, but on the contrary, other people say different. They also claim that the pedestrian crossing, the lights were on green for them to, drive past, and others have said they were on red. Now, in a quality investigation, where you bring all these facts and try to analyse them, then you would get the definitive truth, which would then hopefully lend itself to an outcome that would be justified, and the rationale would support that. But what they did, as I say, they suppressed certain elements of the investigation. They ignored all these, the aforementioned that you've just said, and basically they commandeered the investigation. Now, I know for a fact, a lot of people have said that they basically just talking about speed. They were just thinking about speed, nothing else. They wasn't worried about who's in front of them. They just went down that road as fast as they could. I don't know if this driver was a maverick or some kind of a show-off, I don't know. But I can assure you, he was not driving to the favourable conditions of the road ahead of him. Subsequently, he's negligent because of his reckless driving. Now, the MP of that era in the Wolverhampton North East constituency was a lady called Maureen Hicks, Conservative. And one of the things that she said in the local paper was that, and this kind of encapsulates everything that I've been saying, and she basically said, quote, "No emergency is so serious as to justify the loss of life," unquote. So basically what she's saying is he was speeding unnecessarily. Now, if you're off to an incident where you try to render help and support, it's absolutely stupidity personified if you are killing somebody in the interim before you get there. How does that make any sense? So he was negligent, and the police know he was negligent. He drove that car in a reckless way to create this thing that we're trying to highlight here, which is that he unlawfully killed my mother because of his speeding tactics. They also said basically in the inquest that one lane, and this is one lane of the road, was just over 4 meters wide, and that is absolute joke. The road has since been widened on the pedestrian crossing. It's still not 4 meters wide. So where did they get that from? Again, it was used purely for the inquest hearing to confuse and mislead the 10 jurors, to give the impression to them that the person who's driving that car, their police officer, was in control, did everything that he could do to avoid this fatality. But alas, he didn't, because all the factors that they presented were false. They had no bearing on reality. And as a result of that, they basically brought out or made a case, if anything, against my mother, citing her stupidity for not recognising or hearing or seeing, one, the blue flashing lights of the car, and also not hearing the actual sirens blaring. So in effect, they made a case against my mother. So that would suggest to me then she had suicidal tendencies. So where does that come from? So they basically demonised my mother to the extent that it was basically an open shut case as far as they're concerned. And as I said, the CPS, it was such a weak case before he got to the CPS, they weren't even entertaining the idea, let alone look at the file. So that's how these people worked in 1989. And if I may just add slightly a bit more on that, Mark, this was the era, if you may remember, and some of our audiences might recall, this was the era when we had the Serious Crime Squad that worked out of Birmingham. And the Serious Crime Squad were actually disbanded in 1989 by then the police constable, the chief constable, who was Geoffrey Deere. They disbanded the Serious Crime Squad because of the Birmingham 6 case and also the Bridgewater 4 case. These are iconic cases where in both instances the convictions were quashed because it was found that the police lied, concocted evidence, had false statements. They got statements from the people who were actually convicted under duress. So this is fact. This is not something that I've made up. This is history. History will tell you that. And the person who actually the judge who presided over the Birmingham 6, actually said that in the annals of crime, this is one of the worst cases he had ever seen, where police had knowingly knew that these 6 people, the Birmingham 6, were innocent, but they was going to be fitted up for that crime regardless, because they fitted the bill. 6 Irishmen from the Birmingham area, blah, 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 and that's it off. And this is what I'm saying about the policing of that era. The reason I'm telling you this, Mark, is because although the Serious Crime Squad was disbanded in '89, the year my mother was killed, the culture of policing is still there. Because the culture takes time to eradicate. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not like a light switch where you can turn on and off. So you have officers at various echelons of the police who were corrupt. I'm not saying everybody was, but unfortunately in key areas they were, because for cases to go through like that, they have to be complicit. And I will extend that further to the Home Office pathologist in my mother's case, and also the coroner who oversaw my mother's inquest hearing. And I've said this to the police. I did a 3-hour presentation in 2008 at the West Midlands Police headquarters, and on my slide deck, on one of the slides, slide 9 to be precise, and that's on my website actually, you can see that yourselves if you feel you want to learn a bit more about my mother's case. On slide 9, I did a triangle, and each point of the triangle is the police stroke PCA, Police Complaints Authority. The other point is the Home Office pathologist, and the other point is the Her Majesty's coroner. And I said these 3 people were complicit in the police cover-up. And I delivered this to the police in 2008. And they just looked at me and just, they said, okay, we'll take that on board. In 2008, when I did this actual presentation, they promised me potentially we could have another independent inquiry by a police force other than the West Midlands Police. Basically, they put all the offers on the table, and they said they would get back to me within a couple of months after they deliberated what they were going to do and how they was going to go forward. Subsequently, when they did get in contact with me, they basically said the same thing as before, back in what they said in '89. My mother was at fault. The police had done the investigation and everything as far as they're concerned. There's no case to answer. Okay, so that was what their conclusion was after doing that presentation and trying to get a meeting with them and everything. In 2009, because I wasn't satisfied with that, I did some research on cirrhosis of the liver, and I was fortunate enough to get in contact with a professor of forensics. He was based in the Forensics Institute in Glasgow in Scotland, and I managed to sort of have a bit of correspondence with him. And I asked him outright, I said, in a post-mortem examination, if there is cirrhosis of the liver, how would that actually be fact in terms of it being submitted in an inquest hearing? And the first thing he said to me was, the pathologist who carried out that post-mortem has to, and this is what he said, he has to tell us how he's discounted all the reasons for cirrhosis. Not just alcohol, as they claim, but what other reasons that are contributing factors to cirrhosis of the liver has he discounted, and what is the rationale behind that? And when the professor told me that, I went away and I did six months solid research on cirrhosis of the liver myself. I'd go to work the daytime, when I come home in the evening, I'll be on the internet and I'll be doing research and I'll be trying to find out what's going on. Then it suddenly occurred to me, although there was no cirrhosis, I know that, but the official report says there was cirrhosis, so I have to go along with that. What you got to understand, in Punjabi funerals, we have cremations. So once the body was released by the police, my mother's body was cremated. So the reason I'm saying that is there's no body now to exhume, to do a second post-mortem, to look at the liver all over again, because there's no liver to look at, there's no body to exhume, as I say. So I then thought deeply about my mother and what kind of things, if there was such thing as cirrhosis, other than alcohol abuse, what could be the factors that led to cirrhosis? And it suddenly occurred to me one night when I was looking at the computer that my mother had TB in the 60s. Now in the 60s, when they was treating TB, the drugs that they were using were very strong. In other words, they were very toxic. And they were known to have side effects. And one of the side effects was that they would damage the liver. and there's an actual condition for that. It's called drug-induced liver injury, or DELI, drug-induced, that's the acronym, drug-induced liver injury. So basically, I thought about that in great depth, and I suggested this to the professor again when I spoke to him on the next, and he basically said it could be a possibility. So I then wrote to the Chief Constable of the Westminster Police with all my research, and it was a nice report I put together for his attention. They wrote back literally within about a week, and they said, thank you for your report, we will look at it and we will get back to you. And about 3 weeks after, they did get back to me. And in the letter they sent to me, apparently they had spoken to the original pathologist who carried out the post-mortem on my mother, and he basically then started stepping down from his original alcohol accusation that my mother was an alcoholic, and she incurred cirrhosis for that reason. And he basically said, if your mother was not alcoholic, she never drank, we accept that she never drank and she'd not have cirrhosis due to alcohol abuse. Now you've got to bear in mind, this is 20 years after the event. I'm trying to get some kind of solace, I'm trying to get some kind of, I'm trying to reconcile what's going on here. And they are now saying that potentially there was no alcohol abuse, because I put these factors forward. Because I did the solid research, as I say, for 6 months, and everything I did was actually researched, and it was actually backed up by facts. So they could not deny that. So they decided then to back down. But the point I'm trying to make here, Mark, is that the time for the inquest jury had come and gone. The time for the inquest verdict had been delivered, which was accidental death with no case to answer. But if those factors were then aired in that actual inquest hearing, I am sure that we would have a different outcome today. And also, the aforementioned 2 witnesses, if they were summoned to appear, because the coroner has powers to summon who he wants to the actual hearing, he deliberately, and this is what I'm on about, the triangle I was on about earlier, he is part of this cover-up. And I can assure you, my mother's inquest hearing outcome was not decided in that inquest hearing. It was decided beforehand by other entities, namely the post-mortem report by the pathologist, the coroner who conducted the actual inquest hearing, and obviously the PCA who conducted the investigation. So they decided beforehand how they was going to present the facts, which would be favourable to a verdict of accidental death. And this is what I'm saying, the decision was made beforehand. It was just played out in the inquest hearing because the facts were presented in such a way that this would be quite the case. Does that make any sense, Mark, in what I'm saying in terms of...
Well, I think you've done a great job in explaining the whole thing, and you've run the historical timeline of it for everybody. And I think it's very important that we just reiterate that your solicitor was not allowed access to the original transcripts of the officers, because often when this police evidence is looked at, what officers write down, they often contradict each other, and if it's been done in collusion, that can be often spotted. So the mere fact that they withheld those is pretty damning, and the fact that they decided not to call the witnesses is even more damning, even though one of those witnesses at least was presenting herself on the television stating that your mother was on the pedestrian crossing when she was run over. So that's just in summing up. But is there anything you'd like to add before we go into your latest campaign?
Well, what I would say to you is that, you know, if civilians are involved in a similar kind of situation, we would be separated. So there's 2 of us in a car, we would be separated. And we would be expected to then be interviewed by police officers and give statements. Now, you just mentioned to me, and you kind of reiterated something in my mind actually, there is collusion going on in terms of the statements that were given both by the driver and his passenger. So I'm under no illusions that this was actually, they got together and they basically concocted the same statements. And if we would have had access to those, I'm sure my solicitor would have picked that up. Like you say, the wording, the phrasing, the sentences and how they would have expressed themselves would have been self-evident that there's some kind of collusion going on here. And I'm sad to say, I think that was the case. Both of them got together under the auspices of the police themselves. Like I say, the police force were trying to avoid any adverse publicity on their force. So I'm sure they was given a helping hand with that as well. As I say, I am under no illusions. This was nothing short of a plain sight cover-up. It was so obvious that you would deny it yourself, say, nah, that can't be possible. And I say that because there's three elements to this plain sight cover-up. First element is that they control the investigation and access to the evidence therein, as we've just mentioned. They also control the interpretation and how the death is explained to the media and the public at large. So they're basically trying to sell their story. Bear in mind, they're coming to our family and myself and saying, give us the witness statements, give us witness names, we will interview them. But what they're doing, in effect, is controlling the investigation. And that's what I mean by commandeering the investigation. And the third thing they do is they control the litigation in order to prevent legal discovery and any actions thereafter. So what they're doing then is controlling all these elements, and it all points to a plain sight cover-up. That's my take on it. It always has been. As I said, I was under no illusions when I went to ID my mother's body the next day, on the Wednesday, and when I was treated the way I was treated, and when I was driven home by that officer and told not to speak to any members of the media, because that was trying to tell me they was trying to control it the best they could. And unfortunately, they didn't control it, because I gave a statement to the Express and Star, which is my local newspaper, and I said that this is a police cover-up. And that's fact, that is. And you can see that on my website. It's one of the archived media pieces that's on there. So that's what I would say, Mark. It's a plain sight cover-up. That's what it is. And there's no other words I could. I'd love to be more diplomatic or more, sort of pleasing in terms of my language, but I can't put it any other way. They did what they did because they knew they were guilty. To avert the guilt, they had to do these things. So, that is basically the backdrop to this case and the basic elements to it.
Yes, we chatted the other day about a case that I've reported on, and it has similar elements. I mean, yours is much more serious in the consequences, obviously, but there are people who have contacted me, someone else from your area as well contacted me about this particular police force that I reported on, the Kent Police, and he had the same or similar experience, and none of these things have got any better. In fact, under privatisation and the controlling of the narrative about crimes, then it only gets worse, because what we're finding is this thing called, I call it crime farming. But what you've got on one hand is that the police won't actually attend when they're needed, and when something happens, there's an incident, they're looking for as many people to prosecute as possible. It seems to be what's going on. So if they do attend, defendants are created out of defence witnesses, which is extremely serious. That's something we've covered. But in conclusion for this interview, would you like to tell people where they can go, where they can find the petition, and also, first of all, just tell us your website?
Yes, the website is www.kishnimahay, that's KISHNIMAHAY, all one word, .com. basically, if Mark can put that on the one of your slides, if you can.
I'll do that for you. Yes, yeah, that'll be on the interview.
Just to get that clarity across to our audience. The other thing is that basically the whole idea of contacting your show and trying to get this publicity, basically, Mark, is that I've launched an e-petition, and the e-petition is something that will go live on the 18th of June, Monday the 18th of June. And the purpose of this e-petition is to acquire from the public across the UK 100,000 signatures, which would hopefully then be the ammunition to actually have a debate in the House of Commons, which will then lead to, hopefully, fingers crossed, to an independent inquiry where all the facts will be laid bare, and if there is any wrongdoing, that will be exposed. And we want my mother to have dignity in death. We want her to rest in peace, and most importantly, we want closure. Within the 30th year of this catastrophe, that's the only way I can describe it. And it plays on our minds day and night. We go to bed thinking about it, we wake up thinking about it. It's basically something that we need closure on, and we need to move on with our lives. And this is what this e-petition has been set up. This is a pure reason for it. We also want my mother's name. She was not an alcoholic. I know that. I lived with her for 24 years. I was 24 years old when this death came to the fore. So I know her as well as anybody. I was the first child. So she never drank. That's the bottom line. She's never drank. And I want my mother's name to be cleared. We go to like weddings, we go to family functions, and there's a part of me that I feel I have to bow my head occasionally, because I think what people are thinking about my mother, because they only know the official account, and this hurts me, this grieves me immensely, and I feel really, really down sometimes about this. And this is what the catalyst is for this e-petition, to get the definitive truth. And if we get the 100,000 signatures, we will get that truth if House of Commons is obliging and they do what's required. And the other thing is that, if there is wrongdoing by the police, people should be brought to account. I have no doubt in my mind the officers involved are now sitting on big, fat, juicy police pensions. And that makes me sick, because they have actually killed somebody unlawfully and they've got away with it. And as I said earlier, a police uniform is not either a disclaimer or a defence. And we would like that through this e-petition process. God willing, we will get the 100,000, if not more. And hopefully we can bring this whole case into the public arena, and hopefully we will get a different decision this time, because I have no doubt in my mind that the decision that we will get this time around will be completely different to the original one, because the original one was nothing short of a stage-managed affair.
Thanks a lot, Raj. That's a very good exposition of the whole story, and we'll be putting that out when the petition is online.
Excellent. And I will also say to you, Mark, just an additional thing, if it's at all possible, I think we discussed this before offline, if you can keep our audience sort of updated with the progress, keep promoting for me if you can, because although 100,000 sounds a massive number, it's quite a big number actually, but through social media and the way things work in this world at the moment, especially on the digital platforms, it is achievable. But it can only be achievable if we keep putting it in the public's mind and keep bringing them, making them aware of it. And that's all I ask of you, to just give regular sort of, little snippets of information, where we are, how many do we need, please can we get more people to sign the petition, because the beauty of social media is, if one signs it, then they will obviously, pass through their network to somebody else. And it kind of extrapolates from there to the extent that we can get that 100,000 milestone that we deserve. What I will say to the audience also is, please, if you get time, go to the website, have a look to the backdrop of the case, and you'll have all the documents on there. I'm sure Mark's had a look himself as well. You'll see all the relevant documents that I've put on there. I've tried to be as substantive as possible. I've tried to justify the stance that I've taken with the credible evidence that I've put forward. And hopefully, all these things, the sum of all these things, will be exactly what the petition is set out to do, which is, like I say, to get justice for my mother. Until we get justice, we won't get no peace. And that's, I know it's a bit of a outworn sort of slogan, but no justice means no peace. And that's all I'm appealing to everybody who's listening to this show now. Please support me best you can. Please support my family the best you can. You only there's certain things in life that you only get one off, and a set of parents is a one-off. And to lose them so cruelly in such a cowardly way, I would just appeal to you and just find a little space in your hearts to just put, do that actual e-petition and spread the word for me through your social networks. That's all I'm asking for. And I'm sure this will be the recipe for getting what we want to get.
Thanks a lot, Raj. That's great. And we will keep people updated with the petition and where they can sign it. Thanks a lot for being on Windows on the World.
I appreciate your time, Mark. Thank you very much.
Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and program stream at windowsontheworld.net.